It's a lesson that still needs to be learned. Now, I know today we have a huge number of people who are non-native speakers of English, including the entire Dutch speechwriters mafia, as I understand it. By a show of hands, how many people here are non-native speakers of English? Many. Another question for those who raised their hand. Have you ever had the experience of listening to a speaker and there were times during the speech or presentation where you did not understand what the speaker was saying? If so, raise your hand. It's essentially the same. This is a common phenomenon. On this planet of approximately 8.1 billion people, there are 2.4 billion who speak English. But interestingly, only 400 million of us speak English mother tongue. So more than 80% of the people who speak English are not native language speakers. And this can become a problem. We heard from Sindra about NATO. In 2015, NATO, a working group, produced a final report where they concluded native English speakers are not good at adapting their English for non-native English audiences. Other studies confirm the same thing. Studies have shown that if you have non-native speakers speaking in English, for example, a Greek, a Hungarian, and a Brazilian, and then a native speaker joins the conversation, the chances for misunderstandings increase. Now, why is that? Well, there are obvious reasons: speaking too fast, jargon, colloquialisms. But there's another reason which I think really goes to the core of this problem. I speak other languages. I've given speeches and/or presentations and workshops in French, Italian, German, and Arabic. And I've also studied other languages, not to learn them, but just out of interest. I have books looking at the linguistic constructions of languages because it fascinates me. I'm really interested in cultures and languages. And here's what I firmly believe. English is very different from most other major languages in one significant respect. Most languages, when you go to learn them and you don't speak a related language, they are very challenging at the beginning. This applies to the Latin languages, German for sure, definitely Arabic, the Slavic languages, etc., etc. There are complicated rules for verbs. Each pronoun has a different ending. The subjunctive is challenging. There's gender. Many languages have cases: nominative, genitive, dative, accusative. But as you go deeper into these languages, you start to see the patterns and the repetitions. English is the opposite. It is a language which I believe is very easy to get a solid grasp of early. Our verb structure is simple. Basically, it's the third person singular that changes. We have no masculine, feminine, neuter. Adjectives always come before. They never change. It's relatively simple. But as you go deeper into English, it becomes increasingly complex. And when native speakers meet non-native speakers, such as many of you here who speak excellent English, it's not readily apparent to us that the sophisticated parts of English are understandable by you. So the question becomes, what can we do with it? Because I strongly believe that as a native speaker, I have this incredible advantage today with English being the lingua franca of the world, but I also have a responsibility. And we have a responsibility. I think we native speakers have a responsibility to adapt our language. And it's in our interest as well, because at the end of the day, every speech, every presentation, it's not about the speaker, it's about the audience. And I could say the most eloquently beautiful speech, but if you can't understand what I'm saying, what's the point of me speaking? So what I'd like to do today is offer you a basket of ideas to think about when you are speaking or when you are preparing a speech for another speaker in English to a non-native audience. And I preface my comments by saying I am not advocating for the sterilization of English. English is an incredibly beautiful language. It can be incredibly powerful in simplicity, and then it can be incredibly eloquent in great rhetorical flourishes. But rather, think about these ideas as you are preparing your speeches. The first rule is really the foundation for all of the others. When given a choice between eloquence and clarity, choose clarity. Choose clarity. It is more important that your audience understand what you're saying. Clarity involves, and this clarity is, like I said, it's the backbone for all the other rules. But simple things you can do. Speak a little more slowly. Pronounce, enunciate the words clearly so they're easily understood. And we heard Tessa talk about pauses. Pauses become very important. I love what Mark Twain said. The right word may be effective, but no word was ever as effective as a rightly timed pause, because you give the audience a chance to think about what you said. So if you're writing a speech for a speaker, and the speaker's going to use the notes or a teleprompter, put in square brackets at strategic places. Pause. The notes are for the speaker, to remind them just to slow down, to let the audience absorb it. So clarity is the first thing. Second idea. In general, prefer the active voice to the passive voice. Now I can see smoke coming out of Larry's ears because we talked about this in his workshop yesterday, and when it's an all English audience, I agree. The passive is beautiful and can be very powerful. But I have spoken to non-native speaking colleagues, and they have almost uniformly told me that the passive is more difficult for them to understand because they have to do the mechanical, the linguistic gymnastics in their head of who did what. So it's not the right word should be used. Use the right words. Don't say a decision was taken by the government. Say the government decided. It's going to be easier for your audience. Now, of course, there are exceptions. Where you don't care who the subject was, then you can use the passive. For example, millions of people are diagnosed with cancer every year. It doesn't matter who diagnosed them. What's important is that cancer is still a problem and we need to find a solution. But in general, active versus the passive. A related idea is affirmative versus negative. Sometimes we have to say negative things. We should not do this. We should not invest in that. And that's fine. Where it can become tricky is if I say, it's not a good idea. Not is a negative, but good is a positive. So people, well, if it's not good, it has to be bad. Then just say, it's a bad idea. It's a bad idea. It's easier again for people to understand. A third idea, and this comes from one of the great masters of the English language, Winston Churchill, who said, the short words are the best, and the old words, when short, are best of all. Churchill was really a big advocate for the simplicity of language. And again, this is where we are sacrificing a little bit of eloquence for clarity. But I remember once in Canada, I had a case in court and I went early and I was listening to the trial before me. I heard a police officer in the stand testify. I observed the accused exit the vehicle and proceed on foot to the building. And I thought, why not just say, I saw the accused get out of the car and run to the building? Or I once read an environmental report. The marine biota experienced a 100% fatality rate. All the fish died. So when you're writing your speeches, I encourage you, don't initiate when you can begin. Don't terminate when you can end. Don't transmit if you can send. And please, please don't utilize when you can just use. Another idea, eliminate unnecessary words. The great French writer Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, he wrote Le Petit Prince, The Little Prince, which I encourage everybody to read. I've read that book half a dozen times at least. I always learn something new. He said, perfection is not when there's nothing more to add, it's when there's nothing more to take away. So native English speakers, we frequently say things like, well, basically it's about this, or I literally did that, and these words can actually cause confusion among non-native audiences. We are also very bad at being redundant. So please don't talk to me about advanced planning, because all planning is done in advance. It's just planning. Don't briefly summarize, because a summary should be brief. Just summarize. And please, please, nobody has ever created a new innovation. Because it's either new or it's an innovation. All innovations are inherently new. The next two ideas are very important, and they're ones with which I continue to struggle because they are so prevalent, so common in English. The first of which is to be very careful with contractions. A contraction, in English we have this wonderful convention where we can take 2 or 3 words and compress them into a single word. So I am becomes I'm. You will becomes you'll. He would becomes he'd. They would not becomes they wouldn't. And I've talked to people, especially people who speak Slavic language as mother tongue, contractions are very difficult for them to understand. And when you have a negative contraction, it's even more complex. We wouldn't have invested had we known the outcome. We wouldn't have. We would not have. We would not have invested had we known the outcome. And again, I'm sure that I've used several contractions already while speaking without knowing it, because they are such an integral, such a deep part of the English language. But just be mindful of them. They are a challenge for many people. The second big issue that we have in English, and it's something that gives the English language a wonderful flourish, is something known as a phrasal verb. A phrasal verb. What is a phrasal verb? You take a simple verb, give, take, show, turn, put, run, and then you add a word after it, and it changes the meaning entirely. For example, yesterday I went for a run in Cambridge and I ran into Guy and Brian. And so we went to the bar and we ran up a bill, and now I'm feeling run down. So when you give me your presentation, don't run on and don't give me the runaround. All of these things mean different things. Take the verb to break. A couple might break up, my car might break down. A criminal might break in, but a prisoner might break out. But none of that matters because we've had a big breakthrough, and now we're going to break away from the pack. Again, easy for a native speaker, not necessarily easy for a non-native speaker. Even when the verb and the extra word are the same, it can have a different meaning. Take the verb to put, P-U-T, and take the word down. Put down the pen. Don't put me down. I'm going to put down a deposit. I'm going to put down the baby. I'm going to put down the dog. The dog's fine. The dog's fine. No dogs were harmed in the delivery of this speech. So just again be mindful. If I'm going to put down a deposit, I'm going to pay a deposit. Think again of the audience. Idioms can also be a problem for native speakers. The English language is filled with idioms. I'm going to go the extra mile so we can touch base and raise the bar. We're in the ballpark. I'm going to cut to the chase. No strings attached. And don't worry, I won't leave you high and dry or in the dark or up in the air. I'm going to bring you up to speed so we're on the same page. And these are all kinds of expressions we use, all the time. And yet, these idioms, they don't mean the same thing to other people. And a related idea is cultural or sports references. I work with lots of Americans who come to Europe. I tell them, and Americans here take note. Outside of Canada and the United States, nobody understands American football, and nobody cares. So do not talk about we're going to punt. We're not going to throw a Hail Mary pass. We are not on the 1-yard line going over for a touchdown. And baseball in Europe is very similar. Nobody understands. It's great if you can bring in local cultural references, like here, cricket could work. Football, real football, could work as well. But be mindful of that. Again, I want to stress, I'm not advocating for the sterilization of English because it is a beautiful language. But, again, it's not about you as a speaker, it's about the audience. I leave you with two other ideas before we then have a little bit of time for questions. And these are a little bit different. If you are speaking through an interpreter or writing for somebody with an interpreter, and I've done a lot of that, there are some fundamental things you should do. If you can send the text of your speech in advance to the interpreters, please do it. I always arrive early when I have a speaking engagement. If there are interpreters, I go and meet them. I introduce myself and I ask them, what do you need from me? Because they are an integral part of your speech. I say, what do you need? Just let me know. I tell them what I need. I always make sure I can see them. They're usually in a booth at the back, and we agree on signals. I tell them from time to time, give me a thumbs up if everything is going okay, my speed, my volume. If I'm going too fast, signal me to slow down. It works perfectly, and it's nice and subtle. So if I'm speaking, they're just somebody else in the audience. I just bring them in. Because if I don't do that and I'm speaking quickly, what an interpreter will do is speak into the headphones of everybody else and say, can you tell the speaker to slow down? And that really throws the rhythm off. My website, and I'll write the address over there. Well, it's called mannerofspeaking.org. It's one word. I've been writing a blog for about 15 years on public speaking. There's a post I wrote called Lost in Translation. And it's about 10 tips for working with interpreters. It got picked up at the European Commission, actually, by some interpreters who were convinced I was secretly an interpreter writing this article. But it got circulated a lot, so you can find some other tips there. Final piece of advice, and again, this has nothing so much to do with your English, but it's just a way to show respect for the audience. I firmly believe that when I speak in a country that has a different language, I try and say a few words in the local language. I was in Finland last week, so I said a little bit of Finnish, and people appreciated it. That preparation trip to Boston for this trip to Iran, this was a big trip back in the day at the UN. And I was the head of mission, which meant I was the most senior person. And I was leading a team of about 20 people to Iran. We had 2 days of meetings in Tehran, and then we split into 3 groups to go on fact-finding missions around the country. As head of mission, I had to give an opening statement at the plenary with the head of the Iranian delegation. And I felt very strongly that I wanted to say a few words in Farsi. So I worked on about a 5-sentence opening in Farsi with an Iranian colleague in Geneva at the UN. And before I'm getting ready to leave, I asked my friend Mushtaba, can you understand what I'm saying? And he said, yes, your pronunciation is very good, but it's really interesting because your accent makes you sound like you're from Afghanistan. Because they speak Farsi in the western part of Afghanistan. It's just like when I speak French, I clearly have a French-Canadian accent. So we get to Iran the first day of the meeting. About a little bigger than this, no, about twice the size, 3 times the size of this audience here. I'm sitting at the front. There's a big picture of the Ayatollah Khomeini behind me. There's some government officials. It was like out of a movie. And you could feel the tension. So I gave my opening in Farsi. And then at the end, nice applause. People really appreciated it. As they're applauding, I'm thinking, should I tell them about my accent? Should I not tell them? Should I tell them? Should I not tell them? This is the UN. And then I thought, I'm going to do it. They're just people. We're all just people. So I said, I'm really glad you were able to understand my Farsi because my friend Mushtaba said that it made me sound like I'm from Afghanistan. The whole room just burst into laughter. And you could feel the tension come down a notch. And the meeting wasn't always easy, and it was long, and there were difficult moments, but it set the right tone. And it started from a point of respect. And this is the final thing that I would leave you with. as either native speakers of English or excellent speakers of English, to respect audiences that don't have the same fluency with the language as we do. Because I think when you do that, when people feel respected, they're going to be much more open to receiving your message and much more open to connecting with you. Winston Churchill once said famously that England, Britain and the US are two countries divided by a common language. Don't let English be the thing that divides you with your audience. Use it to bring you closer together. And best of luck to everybody with your speeches and presentations.